Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the At the Water's Edge podcast, where we look for insights beyond the headlines to take a practitioner's view on national security and geopolitics. It's the 21st of March, 2026. Let's get started. Now, the war in Iran continues to escalate, with potential for ground invasion looming ever larger as a Marine Expeditionary Force moves into the region and elements of the 82nd Airborne appear to be getting mobilized. Now, where this conflict goes next is anybody's guess, but Professor Robert Pape from the University of Chicago argues that America is currently in an escalation trap where we continue to ratchet up our level of involvement in the conflict, and the decisions available to the President Trump and other political leaders are becoming narrower and narrower. He joins us to explain how this escalation trap evolves, what policymakers get wrong, and where the conflict might be going next. You can follow more of his work on a substack called Escalation Trap, where tomorrow he'll be giving a live briefing at 5 o'clock Eastern Time on what stage 3 of the conflict with Iran may look like. With that, let's get to our conversation with Professor Robert Pape. Well, Professor Pape, good afternoon and welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Scott. Thank you so much for having me.
No, I appreciate you taking the time. I know you're a very busy man right now. For those of you who aren't familiar with the work, could you please introduce yourself in your own words to the audience?
Sure. I'm a professor at the University of Chicago, and I have been studying Airpower military strategy for 30 years. I started my career after I got my PhD teaching for the U.S. Air Force, helping to stand up the School of Advanced Airpower, now Air and Space Studies. Really quite an honor. We've had four-star generals who, not at the time, but then became four-star generals. This was for mid-level officers, for folks who don't know much about PME. And it was really just a tremendous, and that's where I also learned a lot about not just my studies, but the need for escalation frameworks. So I was, if you imagine, I was teaching the best pilots in the Air Force, just came out of bombing Baghdad, F-117 pilots, the whole gambit, and they knew how to put bombs on targets better than anybody else. What I know in my area of strategy is about not tactics, it's about what happens when you, in between the bomb on target, so to speak, and the political outcome. And that's the part that needs the frameworks, because that's where the military and politics mix together. And that I knew that kind of conceptually before, but teaching for years of the best in the world at putting bombs on targets, I really saw the value. And that's what I've done on the Substack. Now, I created this about a week before the bombing started, because I had been modeling the bombing of Iran for 20 years at the University of Chicago. And I really thought it was important to get the frameworks of what I call the escalation trap. And before the war, I published on the Substack called the Escalation Trap, these stages, stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. And this has been right on track. And it's not because I have a crystal ball. It's because I've been modeling this for so long. And we can go through and talk about this, Scott, but it's really it's an honor, but it's also a bit of a tragedy, because we're getting into deeper and deeper the escalation trap.
Gotcha. And I'm assuming you're calling it a trap because once we're in it, it's really hard to get out of it.
Exactly, Scott. I thought about, should I just call it escalation ladder? And then literally just before I pushed send on the Substack, because I had never done the Substack before, I thought, no, I've got to be I've got to explain to the world what I really think is going to happen, which is it's not just a matter of escalation. It's going to become a trap where at each stage there will be pressure to go forward, like a ratchet effect. So it's not just a ladder. Choice seems to diminish at each stage. Control goes away at each stage. And so the one of the big pieces I wrote early on was the illusion of precision control, and how the idea of these bombs being so exquisitely accurate, and our sensors and our ability to fuse information is just so incredible at the tactical level, that I believe this is what I've seen in my career, because I've also advised White Houses and so forth. I've seen this is what's really underneath the trap, which is the illusion of control. However, that control is an illusion, and it keeps getting fading in stages over time. And that's why I called it trap.
Gotcha. So when we see certain members of the current administration go out on TV and brag about all these tremendous weapons that we have and how they can win this war overnight if they want to. What they're saying in a technical sense might be correct, but they're actually reducing the amount of options they have going forward, not increasing them.
They're reducing the amount of options. And Scott, what I see is just evidence on almost a daily basis of the illusion of control, because they're projecting the idea that as we destroy X numbers of launchers, we're somehow controlling the retaliation and response by Iran. And just before we got on a few hours ago, the Wall Street Journal and others are reporting that Iran has taken several of its intermediate range missiles and launched at Diego Garcia. Now, it hasn't done any damage to the base, but the bottom line is that that's 4,000 miles, you see. So this horizontal escalation, this lashing back in stage 2 I've been describing here, is actually, the range just doubled, essentially.
Wow.
And that means that Rome is in range, Berlin is in range, Paris is in range. Now, maybe we've got some air defenses that can handle this at Diego Garcia. I'm not sure how many air defenses you've got ringing those capital cities in Europe. And I'm not sure how the public's going to feel if you don't need too many of those missiles. And as you know, because you've had a lot of experience, the fragments. So at a military base, people can protect themselves in a whole lot of ways. But when you're dealing with an urban area, those fragments become little cluster munition type of thing. So, oh my goodness.
Yeah, the destruction from the building you hit almost becomes more lethal than the thing you hit it with. It's a pretty nasty problem pretty quick.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's go through some of these stages.
Mhm.
What is stage 1 in the escalation trap?
Stage 1 is the percent. And I'll talk about it specifically with Airpower, but if time goes on, this will be applied to more than Airpower. So stage 1 of this trap is where the precision Airpower, the smart bombs, which on paper can destroy 90% of the targets within about 5-meter accuracy, are real. It's not just paper. They're actually that accurate. Now, it does matter if you have winds. It does matter if you have the accurate map. So this is all, there are ways in which you have error that creep in here that we can discuss. But the fact of the matter is the first stage of the smart bomb trap with Airpower is that it's very accurate. Now, if any human being, and I've seen civilians, I've seen very important leaders who I've seen military. If you are in a room with a PowerPoint briefing and somebody with stars goes up to the wall and points out to you what I just told you, and then starts to pick a country X, let's big white country in Asia, whatever. Okay, doesn't matter. And then they start to show you what will be destroyed with 90% accuracy here with this 5-meter. There's 2 things that are going to happen, almost human nature. Okay. Number 1 is the person listening will say, can I kill leader X? Because they may not even have been briefed. I'm not telling you that the briefer has come in with leadership decapitation, but in the 90s, I was debating with the leaders of the leadership decapitation school. So we were, this wasn't just, sort of schoolroom stuff. We were talking about bombing of Bosnia, how to get out of the Bosnian Civil War, and so forth and so on. So, but number 1 is you start right away, because that 5-meter accuracy equals the size of a room. And everybody knows that. The people being briefed here have triple-digit IQs. They're processing that very, very quickly, and they're leaders. So they're thinking, how can I trouble, kill, knock out, paralyze, kill that leader over there? So right away, leadership decapitation gets on the table, regardless of whether. And then number 2 is you get this idea of the precision illusion, this idea that it's not just when the bombs hit, there's this exquisite accuracy, but this tends to take this idea that you can have control over time. And that tends to lead to not enough worst case analysis, Scott. So it's not that there isn't plans on the shelf, and it's not that there isn't some worst case analysis. It's that the pressure to have the worst case analysis tends to weaken. And that is why again and again and again. And I go through these cases in papers on the Substack, because I had a book called The Smart Bomb Trap, Scott, that I was going to publish. But I said, no, we're going to the big one now. We got to do this right now. We don't have time for some book to come out.
Uh-huh.
So I have all these case studies and so one is, say, Reagan, April 86. This is the very first precision bombing campaign ever, really, where he sends our F-111s to decapitate, kill Muammar Gaddafi. And we do hit the targets. They have to go a long way. There's a whole story about that. But the bottom line is they just missed Gaddafi because they bomb his tent, kill members of his family, but he stepped out of the tent in the middle of the night. So that's something you can't, you see right away.
Mm-hmm.
But afterwards, several years later, actually, on his schedule, he retaliates by bringing down Pan Am Flight 103, killing all 271 civilians, 190 Americans. That's the lash back, you see. Now, there's other cases, Kosovo and so forth, but and I go through these, but the bottom line is that because of that precision illusion and also that idea of marrying it to kill leaders, there's just a great temptation in the smart bomb age to do leadership decapitation with no backup plan for failure. Leadership decapitation, no backup plan for failure. So my book, Bombing to Win, goes through so much of this. I was teaching for the Air Force with John Warden, the leader of this whole idea, for years. It's amazing I didn't get myself fired, by the way, but I didn't. But the fact of the matter is, my argument has always been, if you got to do the leadership decapitation, man, you just go for it, but bring the backup. Don't do this as alone, because that's what's too reckless, you see, because then you don't have any of the backup. And we could go through the cases where we do this. We have no backup. We're underestimating what the other side can do. There you are with Iran and the smart bomb trap. So stage one is the precision bombs. They hit their targets. They kill the leader. That is not the problem. But the problem is that air power alone has never toppled a regime, because when you kill the leader, you trigger self-defeating politics inside of the target. In the target state, there's a gap between society and leader. We see this all the time. And then the idea is, well, we're going to massage hawks and doves and balance of hawks and doves. We're going to kill the hawks, and that's going to bring up the doves. That misunderstands politics, because when you inject the third party, the Godzilla of American military power and that hyper might here, you change the game politically. Now that those doves, if they decide they're going to support America, they become traitors. They become traitors. They're not Thomas Jefferson standing up to the king. They're obeying the king. You see what I mean? So this is a different story, you see, because, and even if you find a few doves who might be willing to do it, they're going to have a Brutus problem right away. They're going to get a bullet. Big chance time they're going to get a bullet in the back of the head by the very people they're standing right next to in the meeting. You see, so this becomes very, very dicey how you're going to go about. And one of the ways I put it, Scott, to people is I try to make them think, well, okay, we know Iran's trying to kill President Trump. What if Iran were to assassinate President Trump? Well, he only has 40% approval. There's a gap between society and the government. Does that mean that Democrats are going to take to the streets and party? And I was just in New York, by the way, on a different podcast. So I said, does that mean you're going to take to the streets in Times Square and invite the Iranians to come on over and, come on over to JFK? We're going to have a party and celebrate. This is what we're talking about in Iran. This is not going to happen. And it's not because there's love between the society and the regime. It's because of nationalism. It's because of this changes the game. And that's why you can't see it in Intel. You see, this is not some people tried to say, well, that's an Intel problem. And the problem here is we just got to rely on Intel. Intel tracks pre-war trends. They can't tell you when the game changes what's going to happen. You see, that's my territory, doing the work I do. That's not an intel problem. So this is really the game changer of how the smart bombs hit targets tactically, strategically fail for things like regime change, and actually and why we are 0 for 40 since World War One. We're not like, oh, it sometimes works, sometimes doesn't. We very few military patterns are literally zero. I mean,
Yeah.
it's really that extreme. And this is the reason why. It's not because of tactical failure or we didn't have eyeballs on the leader. I mean, I've been through all of this here where, oh, we just need to get eyeballs on the leader. Well, no, we do that now all the time here. And that's when we push the go code, usually, is when we get the eyeball on the leader. So, no, those are not the problems. We are tactically outstanding, Scott, at the military with the military. That's not going to lead to strategic success for goals that just can't be done here. And it's because they are self-defeating politically.
I right after the war with Iran started, we brought on a spokesperson for the National Council of Resistance of Iran, one of the prominent diaspora resistance movements, and they were talking about how over the past dozen years, their assets inside of Iran had grown in sophistication. They've been driving the protest movements. They're a big driver behind the current protest movements. And so I had to ask her, I was like, well, do you think us dropping bombs on Iran right now and killing the Ayatollah is going to help or hurt the cause? And we got the very polite, like, well, we don't really want to be associated with anyone outside of Iran. We don't want your money. We don't want your participation. Like, thanks for killing them. But if y'all could just stop right now, this isn't going to work.
As soon as you hear Scott, I've seen this so many times.
I'm summarizing, but that was the polite way.
Yeah,
that was
but as soon as you hear the pause, see the pause, you know what's really coming here. And this has simply been time after time, whether it's Libya, whether it was trying to kill Saddam. So many times we tried to kill Saddam with Airpower, whether it was taking down the Milosevic regime and his crony regime. And a lot of these regimes are just absolutely thoroughly corrupt. So it's not that we are characterizing the regimes usually. It's there, this isn't a debate about, well, is the regime really as corrupt as they say? And no, that's not it at all. It's a different, more fundamental problem with regime change with air power alone. Now, that's not to say that if you add ground forces, you knock it off right away. I mean, you do sometimes. It does improve the odds, but it's not a slam dunk, as Israel's been finding out with Hamas for the last 2.5 years. So if you sort of say, well, let's look at Israel seems to be so confident they can do regime change. Well, the big question I want to ask Prime Minister Netanyahu is, if you're so good at this and it's worked so well, why can't you do that with Hamas? And you've had air power, you've killed Sinwar, you've got ground forces, you've killed 100,000 of the civilians here, of the 2 million. I mean, just think about that. The amount of 90% of all the residential areas have been thoroughly destroyed. You've gone through and inflicted some of the most horrendous military damage on any society, government. And what's happening is they haven't fallen. Now, maybe they're about to fall. That's what they keep saying. Just one more bomb and we're about to get there. But this is really showing the difficulty and it's a political counterproductive problem. It's not a military tactical problem. And that's why the more exquisite tactics can't solve the problem.
Yeah. So how do we get from stage 1 to stage 2? What triggers that transition, and what's a stage 2?
Well, let me just say, so stage 2 here with the smart bomb trap, I'm choosing my words here, is where the enemy then lashes back because you have underestimated the worst case. The time in history, Scott, that I know that we did this, and I know this up close and personal, was during Kosovo, which was I was not in the Air Force at the time. I was already at the university. I was already out working at universities. But after Kosovo, I had an opportunity to go and interview President Ahtisaari in Finland, who was negotiating with Milosevic. Strobe Talbot, who was dealing with this from the Ministry of Defense with Russia, Wesley Clark here, who was leader of the whole thing. And also, though, and this name I won't give you because you'll hear this story and this will be on tape. The leading person on the National Security Council staff, whose job it was to do the worst case analysis for President Clinton. And that person, and I'm going to try to not even use gender so nobody can possibly figure out who that was from these many hundreds of people. Okay. That person, I was in that person's office and they literally pulled out the sheaf of the 400 top secret slide deck that had been printed out to sit in the Oval Office with President Clinton and go through it. And this was this person's job. And he explained to me that he never had Operation Horseshoe, the actual lashback that Milosevic did. See, we were supposed to have a 3-day air campaign, hit 51 targets in and around Belgrade. We actually also hit Milosevic's home here. The idea was this is a crony-based regime. We're going to weaken it in all these sophisticated ways with this precision targeting and so forth. But then Milosevic lashed back with 30,000 ground forces, launched an offensive into Kosovo itself here, and expelled 800,000 plus, almost 1 million Kosovar civilians, one of the worst ethnic cleansing campaigns in history. 50% of the country was cleansed, many thousands killed, and we could do nothing about it. We didn't even have the tactical error. We were so confident in leadership decapitation. We didn't even have the tactical Air Force on hand, no A-10s, nothing. So we did this, and this is one of the big problems I've been arguing when I go toe to toe with the, inside these debates here. Basically, my position here with the Air Forces, when we're talking about trying to end the Bosnian Civil War or whatever it is okay, they may be right. Maybe they're going to have this one time where they've got the case where it hasn't worked for 100 years, but what we need to understand is the risk. And that means bringing in the backup. And that's a problem because that backup is expensive. It takes time. And it is just the way it is, though. If you don't bring in the backup, then you really are betting all your chips on Red 36. And if you don't hit Red 36, and I'm saying it's worse than that, you are really, really going down. So now they lash back. You have the horizontal escalation campaign of Iran. The reason I published a piece in Foreign Affairs just literally days after this started, and it's because, again, keep in mind, I've had this book, The Smart Bomb Trap, for some time, so I'm pretty expecting a lot of these counters. And what had happened on the Saturday, Feb 28th, is that Iran was beginning to lash back, but it was being dismissed as dead enders, spasms of the dying body, not really anything to worry about, just a little dust here. And that's when I sent the piece a few days later to Foreign Affairs. And then they published it on Iran's horizontal escalation strategy, where I lay out they're deliberately widening the battlefield. That's what horizontal escalation is from Iran. And their goal here is not just to randomly hit targets. They're using drones as precision guided drones to hit nodes in the enemy, and they see the enemy as a system, much the way Warden did in the 1990s. So I see that Iran's just simply downloaded all of the parallel attack precision warfare from Warden, Deptula, all of those folks here. Most of this not classified at all. This has just simply been circulating for decades here, published in so many ways. And so I see them adopting parallel attack, hit the nodes of the enemy as a system. And what's their goal? Fracture the coalition. They have a political objective. And I said this in the Foreign Affairs piece. And what happened is the supreme leader eventually came out with a statement, and he explained the logic of his coercive campaign. He explained it as fracturing the coalition. It's all about and this really isn't rocket science. It really is just understanding that if you have been, I've been studying the bombing of Natanz, Bordeaux, the consequences for 20 years Every year in spring, I teach strategy at the University of Chicago. We end with 90 minutes on this, and I walk them through. And stage one is we hit Bordeaux, we hit Natanz. That's the beginning of this whole mess. But the problem is not that we didn't destroy the installations as industrial facilities. We don't know where the nuclear material is. So then I always said we would come back about a year later for the regime change war. Even though we didn't want to do regime change, we would talk ourselves into it because we would panic, because once you've hit those sites and you got pictures, and I show some of these on my substack of the satellite, of them possibly dispersing that 60% enriched uranium, bad things could happen with that. And every passing month, you get more and more upset and nervous. And then, of course, you've got the Israelis throwing, fire at this as well. But the bottom line is they were going to do the regime change war very likely about a year or two later. Well, they did 8 months later. They're actually ahead of schedule here. And then that's not going to work very well.
Yeah.
And for all the reasons I just explained, you're going to get the lashing back. They took the Strait of Hormuz just like clockwork here. I mean, they literally took the Strait of Hormuz right in front of our nose. We had nothing there to stop it. It's worse than Kosovo. And they now are the oil hegemon that, as you know, Scott, if you looked at any unclassified, not classified, you don't need the war plan. The number one mission of America in the Middle East since the 1970s has not been about Israel. It's been to stop an oil hegemon. And what is that defined as? One country, whether that's Iraq, Iran, Saudi Arabia, or Soviet Union, doesn't matter. One country controlling all the oil, the 20%, and basically the Strait of Hormuz. That's the key center of gravity for that whole thing. This was been there forever here. We've got papers on that. I mean, oh my goodness. And they just took it because we had nothing there to stop it, you see? So this is why we're now moving to stage 3. And by the way, I've laid this out 3 days before the bombing. Stage 3, which is the limited territorial control option, ground operations, because now you've got a country that is still got all that enriched uranium and probably dispersing it more and doing more bad things with it than before. Now you've got a more dangerous regime, which you have thoroughly persuaded is got survival on the line, like now, not 5 years from now, but right this moment. And now they control the Strait of Hormuz. So are you just going to literally walk from this? It's going to be very, very, very difficult. And because that power that is amassing here with the nuclear material, you can just see this has all kinds of geopolitical implications, Scott. And just one more point on this, Scott, if you don't mind, because I'm preparing for this live briefing tomorrow on the Substack here. And I'm going through the slide deck. And one of the key things I want to drive home tomorrow is, do you know that America, and maybe everybody does, is the biggest oil producer in the world? We produce 16% of the world's oil. Number 2 is Russia at around 11%. Number 3 is Saudi Arabia at just under Russia, 10, 11, depends on how much they pump out at any given point. Okay. And everybody else is down in the low single digits. All right. But those are the top 3. Well, guess what happens now that Iran is 20%? They're 20% of the world's oil, in charge of the choke point, bigger than America. Who just became the number 1 oil control? It's Iran. And what does that mean? They can control the price of oil more than we can. So notice that we've put we said, well, we'll put our reserves out there, and it's not stopping the price of oil from going up. Why? Because 20% beats 16%. That's the bottom line here. And this is really, Scott, it's so tragic for me, but this is why I did that escalation thing, that trap. I wasn't teaching then. I'm starting to teach next week, but I wasn't teaching then. And I thought, I just got to get this out there because it looks like we're really going to do this. Yep. And we've got to lay it out so people understand this isn't just random failure. This is the fully predictable, catastrophic failure that was always likely if we did this set of steps.
Yeah. When I'm looking at this, two things that I think are really interesting. One is the asymmetry and the response as far as what the nations involved targeted. And if you look at the classic model for, elements of national power, the DIME model, diplomacy, information, military, economic. I was thinking about this morning and mapping it out a bit. But you have America, big military versus Iran, little military. And our entire approach just seems to be like, if we can just bomb the crap out of that little M, everything else doesn't matter. And Iran's approach appears to be, well, we're going to take what's left of our little military, and we're primarily going to go after economic. If you actually look at the amount of targets they've hit, most of them have been related to economic infrastructure in the region. So they're going to take their little m, go after the global big E, and in the process, ruin our diplomatic relationships with Europe and just about everybody else.
You're putting your finger right on this, Scott.
And I hate to say it, but as someone who was in special operations and used to formally do the U.S. side of this, it's been pretty masterful to watch. Like, it's actually been impressive how well they've executed this.
Yeah, I give them a B plus A minus, Scott. They're not. Yeah. I still think we would have had done better with their cards, so to speak, because I have a lot of faith in our side because I've taught many of them.
We could have done better, but I'll give them credit. They're playing their cards well.
I give them a B plus and an A minus here, as they've done. And basically, Scott, to put it in slightly different terms, because I'm really big on these frameworks here. We've been waging a conventional war framework, which would be great if we were up against an army toe to toe in the battlefield, like at Kursk in World War II, where it's an army versus army, tank versus tank. This would work out pretty well here. But that's not what we're fighting this conventional model, whereas what they're doing is, you called it asymmetric, it's economic warfare 101, basically. And what is that about? It's going after, it's a long war strategy, not a quick and decisive victory strategy. It's a long war strategy where what they're doing is going after the economic and political pillars of America and also the GCC. This is what the Vietnamese found out and did to us in Vietnam. We never lost a battle, set piece battle, conventional battle. We lost the war, and we lost the war because the long war strategy by the Vietnamese was to basically have us absorb costs after costs after costs. And this would just simply wear on the American public over time. And that's who pulls the plug here, because they see it was it's not going anywhere. You see, Vietnam was really the first forever war that we had. And it was the most costly, 58,000 dead. And that's why the public pulled the plug so abruptly. Here, we're heading to the fourth forever war. And the costs here, I think, are going to be I don't know if it'll be as high, 58,000 battle casualties. I'm not saying that. But I am saying that the casualty count overall could be high, including civilians over time. And also the economic costs here could be back at least to the 1970s, Scott. So I was a young kid in the 1970s. You weren't there in the 1970s. But let me just say that what happened after the OPEC oil embargo was 10 years of economic stagflation, 15% mortgage rates, 15% mortgage rates, not 4, 3, 6, you see, that we've been used to for most of our lives, you see. This went on until OPEC was 74. This went on until 1982. So President Ford couldn't fix it. Carter couldn't fix it. The first 2 years of Reagan couldn't fix it. It finally worked itself through the system here. And this is, unfortunately, if this continues through, say, the fall at this rate, maybe even through to July, by the way, we're not talking about reversible temporary disruption here. And we're seeing this transition. I'm going to talk about this tomorrow, from disruption to damage, where damage is much more permanent, much more long-term to reverse. And I don't mean long-term and much more cumulative, where you get the domino effects that are going to start to move through the system. And this would make the pandemic supply, we talk about supply chain problem in the pandemic. The 1970s was another level beyond that.
Yeah.
So this is really why this was a trap, and why I'm spending so much time talking to everybody I can to warn that crossing the Rubicon of the ground forces, where now, if we use it for the coastal regions, or as we were just talking about before we got on, the idea of getting at some of the nuclear material, any of those scenarios, you are likely to have not 13 dead American military, but more dead American military, possibly an order of magnitude more. And that may make the American public start to double down. It may push them away too. But this is going to not in the begin. This is going to be another part of the trap, you see, which is certainly the supporters of President Trump. When they see 100 dead Americans, what they're going to do is say everybody should rally around the flag. Now, maybe the other 60% will not see that, but this is going to create. It'll be some time, I believe, before you would actually crack the 40% here. It may crack eventually. I'm not saying it can hold together forever here, but the once you have the ground casualties for real, you're going to have the movie Saving Private Ryan on 24/7, and this is going to be both sides. The side doesn't like the war, this is going to be horrendous cost. The side that does support the war, this is going to be, again, patriotism. And so I'm really concerned, once we cross this Rubicon of the ground operations, the word limited is not going to really capture it.
Yeah. So one thing I heard you talk about was how in different parts of the escalation trap, different stages, you have different centers of gravity and different sides of different tactical advantages.
Yep.
So we're in stage 2 right now, looking at potentially going to stage 3.
That's right.
What's the center of gravity and who has the tactical advantage during stage 2? And, for the folks who are actually in the region or rapidly moving towards the region, what should they understand about how that center of gravity and tactical advantage shift if we go to stage 3?
I love talking to military folks, Scott. And if you went to the escalation trap, you'll find, so I've written a lot of papers on it now, but you'll find one about the center of gravity in stage 2. So this is a great, your music to my ears to think with these ways and these frameworks. It's the Strait of Hormuz. It's in stage 2. So this horizontal escalation campaign hasn't been this economic warfare. It hasn't just been the enemy as a system with the precision targeting of with the drones. It's had led to a culmination point, as Clausewitz would describe it, and that culmination point was controlling the Strait of Hormuz here. And so that really is the center of gravity going forward, and that's for both sides and for Iran. That's what we just talked about. Now, if we go to stage 3. Now the center of gravity will have another center of gravity, and this is when the American public here and the Western publics are going to start to come on board. Because, and I'll be talking about this. See, so far I've only explained there's stage 1, 2, and 3. We haven't talked about stages 4 and 5. Now, I deliberately did that because I didn't want to. I was already taking big risks by laying out 1, 2, and 3, and given the timetables of it and so forth. So please, it's not that I didn't put my neck on the line. It's that I didn't really want to get distracted. But what's going to happen if we go to stage 3, and you already see Iran is preparing for that, and that's what I think this missile strike toward Diego Garcia was all about, because this dovetails with their statement. They're going after Western civilians, you see, and they have not done that yet. And people are going to say, oh, they would never come after Western. Really? I mean, they just killed 20
I think those were the same people that say they would never close the Strait of Hormuz. So I'm not sure the track record
exactly
there inspires confidence.
And for your listeners to know, I have spent 20 years. I'm one of the world's leaders, if not on studying suicide terrorism. I compiled the complete database of all suicide attacks around the world. I sent this to Deputy Secretary of Defense Paul Wolfowitz, who I knew beforehand, and told him if we invaded Iraq, we would touch off the largest suicide terrorist campaign in modern times. Came back through Andy Marshall. Bob, we're not going to change our decisions on Iraq based on this, but we will move our troops out of Saudi Arabia. That's how we started IUD airfield. That's how that happened. And then we did invade and did touch off the largest suicide terrorist campaign in modern times. It happened. And then who started my center, which was first called in February 2004, 2004, the Chicago Project on Suicide Terrorism. It was the Pentagon, the Rumsfeld Wolfowitz Pentagon. People think, oh, it must have been some liberal foundation. No, no, it was actually the people I was saying were going to cause all the problem. And they just thought, and that's why I collected all the martyr videos in the world. I translated them. I sent people to black markets. I did a tremendous amount here on this. And that allowed me to brief the Bush administration and try to work with them to get us out of this hole that we had dug. And basically every White House from 2001 to 2024, to Repub, to Dem here. And I would brief this one too. I don't pick a president. I'm trying to help the country and save lives here and save us from getting deeper in these pits.
Yeah. Well, we're coming up on time, but as we get to closing, two questions for you. What do you think that policymakers and the American media really misunderstand the most about what's going on in Iran and what we're potentially looking at?
That it's number one is that I would say 80-90% of the coverage is imbued with politics. And that, of course, we've had a lot of political violence in our country. I understand that. I myself will have a book on the subject coming out in September. It's coming out already. It's in press here. And so number one issue here by far is that this isn't this isn't like 2003. We had some politics in 2003 when we went to Iraq, for sure. This is a whole several levels more intense. And so what they're doing on all the shows is they're lining up. Notice they haven't changed hardly a single commentator on any of the main shows, not hardly a single one. These are the same people that have been debating American domestic politics for years. And now they're just saying, well, okay, I'm just going to go talk about the war here. So I would say issue number one is that. I would say issue number two is when we are bringing out maps and so forth. And I do think Admiral Kirby is at the University of Chicago now. He is one of our jewels. So I love having Admiral Kirby here at the University of Chicago. But I would just point out that they're really having a hard time because they continue to focus on tactics. It's about tactics, and they're not really able to talk to the public and treat them like they have triple-digit IQs and undergraduate degrees, as most of them do who watch these programs, and understand the intermix between politics and strategy, or politics and military tactics. And that's, again, I've seen this for a while. I thought that would happen, and that's why I did the Substack. I thought there will really be a need for this. And based on what's blowing up in my email and my phone every day, and there seems to be quite a need for this mixture here. And I do hope both of these will become better. I hope we'll find a way to, reduce the discussion of the domestic political angles here to like 30% from 75 to 80%. And then that other 20%, I hope we can divide it between military tactics, which are important. I mean, myself, I need to learn about tactics, but also to really understand more about the mix here between tactics and politics. And that's not something the generals know. I know because I've taught people like the generals. And so you really can't get the same thing here from the same horses, or different things from the same horses. They're really good at what they do. Again, I'm not, and so are the political commentators. They're black belts at what they do, but we're in a different dimension. And those are the two things I think we're missing in the journalism.
Okay, final question, and then we will get you out of here on time.
Thank you.
What advice would you give President Trump on what to do next in the war with Iran?
So I've said this in other programs here, Scott. It's really to accept you have to cut your losses now. It will be a big political loss for him, but possibly recoverable for his presidency versus going deeper, and the losses will be bigger and unrecoverable for his presidency. And then number two, what that means is you got to cut a deal with Iran for real, a real deal. He didn't like the previous ones. He's not going to like this one any better. It's going to be a lot worse because Iran's got a lot more cards than it had 21 days ago. And what the biggest problem that he will have to face is not turning on the sanctions. I've been arguing for that for a while. You see, Scott Bessent just did that. It's not even paying reparations here. The biggest problem is going to be containing Israel. So I don't think you're going to be able to cut a deal here in any way with Iran that's meaningful and allow Israel, whenever it chooses, to simply bomb the bits out of anything it wants to in Iran. And I think that if you contain Israel, which would probably mean they have to sign the non-proliferation treaty, that if there's going to be on-site inspection in Iran, there's going to be on-site inspection in Israel. If you don't do that, I think we're going to end up with a nuclear armed Iran, maybe radiological weapons. So again, there's stages 5 coming here. And I think the problem here is that this is why it would be worth it for President Trump politically, be worth it for our country, for our security, and worth it for the world. And I would argue this is also in the best interest of Israel's security.
Well, Professor, thanks so much for taking the time to talk with us today. Really enjoy your insights. Looking forward to talking again, hopefully on a less present topic.
Oh yeah, let's hope we have some things go on, and you're bringing me on. Oh, you made that mistake wrong. Yeah, let's do that.
Well, you got everything wrong. It was all fine. Now let's talk about your latest book and chill.
There you go. Really, I just enjoyed it so much, Scott. Thanks for the insightful questions. Thank you.
Appreciate you.
Okay, bye-bye.